child cannot, because it's not of age, cannot speak for itself in a legal process. So there is this traditional thing that then the parents would speak, but that might create problems. So now there is this whole notion of the child's advocate, and that would be perhaps a judicial decision or some other arrangement. It's still being developed. When it was proposed, it was not quite clear whether it would work, and it has to be nurtured to work. So in that sense, there will be an innovation journey. It's not quite clear whether there actually will be a particular pattern of this kind of innovation journey. This can be a very singular type of journey. This is the reference, actually. There must be some sort of institutionalization. Otherwise, you can't talk about these recognizable and recurrent patterns. But for social legal governance technologies, you do see some specialization. You see some professionalization in one area more than in another. So it is, you can actually ask this question and try to find out, gather data to give an empirical response. There is this question whether there is something like social technology. And I just talked briefly about that in order to get it out of the way, as it were. There is the earlier discussion of social engineering from the 1940s, I think. That has taken off, and some people think it's wonderful, say to help the poor and improve the cities. This is American-style social engineering. And others are against it because of the connotations that you shouldn't engineer people, only cows. That it ranges from just developing social means to achieve a goal. That's the sort of almost instrumental part, but also creating and maintaining an order, including the disciplining that goes with it. That's also socio-technology, obviously. And there's been a big debate, particularly in Germany in the 1970s, which is forgotten now, I think, but some people still refer to it. And you can go on and have further examples. You could think of these overpasses on Long Island as socio-technology. Why not? Because the intention was to discipline people rather than to have wonderful overpasses. And there is a difficult question: what is this emphasis on social means in defining socio-technology? I find it too limited. All the social is also material, you could say. But there is, I think, an interesting question there. Is this emphasis on the social, not the limitation, but the emphasis, is that the delegation to what works and the black boxing that's involved, is that more difficult? Because people can sort of see what's happening, can criticize, can undermine it, also in their reactions, while sort of physical technology is thought to be not so perverse, will just do what it's designed to do. That's not the case. I mean, if you know that your computer or your laptop sometimes in an unexplainable way doesn't function as it should, and then your system guy says, oh, just switch it off and switch it on again, and then often it works better. Who knows what happens? I want to actually go back to the innovation journey stuff and create some distance, you could say, because I'm interested in the innovation dynamics and possible patterns, somewhat independently how much social and how much physical is in it. So I look also at the nature and extent of institutionalization. And doing this is a particular entrance point. So the larger questions about creating and maintaining social order is a very important question, and how that may change again. And you have very important things like governmentality studies. I found intriguing that the Technology Assessment Switzerland office is now having a product of technology assessment where they study the use of indicators for decision making as a social technology. And not going very fast. It's sort of a marginal thing for them, but it's there. Oh, I should have animated this. Sorry. It's too late. Specifics that you might see, well, it's still configurations at work. That's the general definition that I like to use for technology. The scripts are now up front. In a sense, the script that is embedded in technologies, as Madeleine Akritsch and Bruno Latour have been talking about and analyzing, you could say here the script is the technology. And that creates some special dynamics. There's a much stronger link to overall perspectives on societies, ideologies, so the whole liberalization movement and actual changes is important for social technologies and their innovation journeys. And there is a sort of co-evolution where the instruments and the changes in the landscape might actually influence each other, reinforcing, undermining, and so on. And there will be, sometimes you can delegate a lot to the instruments, particularly the economic instruments, and sometimes you can't. So that becomes almost an empirical question, whether that there's still sufficient similarity to speak of one pattern. I'll steal some fire from Jan by using one of his pictures from a few years ago about emissions trading. You can't really read it, but the point is that here in the small print, you see all sorts of things that were happening in and around emissions trading. And there is a sort of co-evolution. In particular, there was here economic theorists, which linked up at one moment with broader policy discourses in the beginning of liberalization. But you also see arrows in the other direction, where there is some experimenting with flexible regulation, and then further experimenting also in the US. And then the acid rain program actually created almost the first working prototypes of this system. Not necessarily much influenced by or supported by the general economic theory. And then that continues, and the emissions trading breaks through. And then it starts to change regimes, and it becomes sort of explicit co-evolution with the overall shifts in the landscape, like liberalization and some other things. So this is a more complex picture than the one that I originally showed with just Frank Geel, where you had this strong sort of early, almost immaculately conceived innovation, and then it started by its own force almost to change regimes. This is a much more co-evolutionary perspective, and that will have effects both on the nature of the journey and on probably the difficulty of finding very recognizable patterns. Although, by way of conclusion, there is enough professionalization already and division of labor to see a pattern. And I mentioned these two, economic instrument management approaches, and not only within organization, but now also in terms of new public management. And you could see a pattern there, and then the question is, will other social legal governance innovations start following that same pattern, or more or less the same pattern? My final thought here is that actually public engagement, I think, is going in this direction. And there is much more to say, and people will be talking about that tomorrow as well. My own experience is in this ELSA business that Jan was mentioning, ethical, legal, social aspects of new technology, in particular nanotechnology. You see incipient professionalization with ethicists and social scientists having workshops how to develop ways of engaging the public or making scientists and technologists more reflexive, and it becomes a business in its own to develop these things. So I have to study myself as well in order to find out about possible patterns in this fifth innovation journey. Thanks.